Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to ask that everyone remain on mute during the presentation, and there is closed captioning that you can find in the navigation bar. Thanks for joining today for a career conversation, Breaking Professional Inertia, hosted by the University of Rochester Lifelong Learning and Career Programs, and led by Leadership and Executive Coach Alex Pearlman. I'm Michelle Cavalcanti, and I'm your host today, along with my colleague, Robin Neely, who is the Director of Lifelong Learning and Career Programs. Today, we'll explore the science behind professional inertia and walk away with practical strategies to move from knowing what to do to actually into doing it. Our speaker, Alex Pearlman, is a certified executive coach and founder of Pearlman Coaching. He helps professionals gain clarity and confidence using his self-determination compass framework. And formerly a PwC consultant and education leader, Alex blends business strategy and human development to create transformative coaching experiences. He's a Rochester alum from the class of 2007, a former student association president, an alumni life and career coach. He is one of our many amazing mentors, and he is a committed member of our UR community. So hopefully you've all completed your self-determination compass assessments already. If you haven't, do not worry. You can do that after the session today. And we encourage you to ask your questions by sending them to me in a private chat, but also you can use our group chat as a way to participate in this program. Also, Alex will be asking for people to participate and answer questions in there as well. So I hope you will all do that. And now I will not hesitate anymore to invite Alex to start. It's very early in the morning. I'm going to have him tell where he is coming from. Welcome, Alex. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Michelle, so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Pearlman. I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Michelle, and to Robin for hosting today's webinar. As we dive in, Michelle mentioned this is going to be a participatory webinar. So please either scan the QR code or go to menti.com. And you'll have a number of prompts for this, but this will be our tool for engagement today since we are going to be a fairly large audience. And Robin will throw that link in the chat. So as Michelle mentioned, I'm excited to be here with all of you. This is going to be a big group, so stay on video if you want, get off video if you don't want to be on video, totally fine. Engage in chat today. And then reach out to Robin or Michelle if you have any technical issues. So I want to tell you a little bit about me. So Michelle gave you a little bit of a heads up that I am in the middle of the morning. It's a 4 a.m. where I am. I live in Fiji right now. I am married to a U.S. diplomat, and he and I have been stationed out here for the last 2 years. But my journey, the really critical part of my journey actually gets started at the U of R. Where I was a political science major and got very curious with the ideas of what motivates people to do what they do. And I took that passion to public schools in New Orleans, where I was a teacher and school administrator. And in that part of my life was focused on what motivates kids to learn or what motivates teachers to drive student achievement. After business school, I joined a global strategy consulting firm, helping clients build effective organizations and workplace cultures. And again, this passion for motivation and what drives success was always core to the decisions that I was making for myself professionally. As my husband and I made this transition to living abroad, I opened up my leadership coaching practice, and I spend my time helping clients find that intrinsic motivation for their own personal success and how to take control of their professional lives. And what that means is breaking professional inertia. And we're going to get into that and a lot more today, but just a little bit of a tease. So now that I've told you about me, I'd love to hear about all of you and what brings you here today. So this is going to be our first opportunity to participate in our Menti conversation. So if you haven't done so already, please sign in to Menti. If you're new to the chat, Robin will drop the link in. And I'd love for you to respond to the first prompt question. What brings you here today? And let me switch my share screen. All right. Oh, awesome. Look at that. Okay, lots of people feeling stuck in their current role. That's inertia at its finest. Know what changes I want to make but can't seem to take. Okay, understand that. A couple people here on clarity to stay or leave their position. Conversation I have often with my clients. Job searching but struggling. Totally hear you on that. There's a moment people are having right now. Experiencing burnout. Okay, totally get that. Um, Supporting someone else feeling stuck. Okay, I'd love to hear from more from those who are part of the support system. Give folks a couple more minutes to get a couple more seconds to log in to Menti and see how we're doing. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, can see where we've got our biggest pain points here. A lot of burnout, job searches, trouble taking action, feeling stuck in the current role. Okay. Well, this is great. Thank you all so much for giving me a sense of what brings all of you here today. And I'm hoping, as Michelle said, we will talk about the science and what's behind professional inertia, and then talk about some practical ways to break it up. But that's great. Okay. So, all right. Wonderful. Okay. Oh, Steph's navigating my. Okay, we're back. So, in today's session, whether you're feeling stuck in your current role, as some of you have shared, or searching for that new position, um, you're in the right place. So my goal is to cover in the next 30 to 40 minutes um, how to identify your version of professional inertia. And from there to gain insights into what you need to do or what you can do to own your professional life on your own terms. And this may involve pursuing multiple paths. And so our third goal for the day is to start thinking through how do you navigate those paths and make decisions to take action. So the key to all of this is understanding the concepts and hopefully, and my goal is for you to walk away with some tangible, practical steps. Um, so why focus on professional inertia? Well, inertia, because professional inertia is, I find from the work I've done with my clients, both in the in the private sector and as a coach, it's a it's one of the most common but least discussed challenges that I find folks are facing. Um, I'm sure a lot of you have gotten career advice from bosses, mentors, maybe even from parents that are very tactics focused. What a good resume looks like, uh, how to interview, how to do networking. But these tactical strategies often fail to address the underlying forces that keep us stuck. And the real barrier often are psychological or motivational forces that prevent us from taking the action we know that we're supposed to be taking. So let's start with the basics. As I mentioned, I was a political science major, so a refresher from high school physics for any non-science majors out there like me. So inertia is Newton's first law of motion. It's the law of inertia. And inertia is a property um, that causes objects to resist change. So I want you to think about that. Inertia causes objects to resist change. So in physics, inertia is simply an object at rest will remain at rest, and an object in motion will remain in motion. And the same principle applies to our careers. We tend to stay in our current state. That could be in a static state or in a motion state, but we stay in that state unless we intentionally apply force to that change. So I look at professional inertia in two main forms. So the first is directional inertia. So directional inertia is those of us who have been continuing on a professional trajectory out of momentum rather than intentional decision making. Um, think of it as moving, but not necessarily in a direction that you've consciously chosen. This person may have initially followed a promising career path, but 20, 15, 20 years later, they're not sure it aligns anymore with who they are, who they want to be, how their life is set up. And then there's static inertia. So static inertia is the inability to overcome a specific challenge or barrier to your progress. This could be someone, as some of you said in your sort of welcome survey, um, you know that you need to make change, but feel unable to take action. Maybe you keep putting off updating your resume, or you keep delaying reaching out to contacts, despite knowing that networking is part of the job search process. Either way you look at it, both forms share one thing in common. They represent a gap between what you want and the actions that you're actually taking. So this goes back to motivational and psychological barriers. So professional inertia shows up differently depending on where you are in your career journey. And from those of you who took the survey, I can see that we've got a wide range of early, mid, and late career folks on the line. I do want to note, for those of you who might be multitasking right now, feel free to take a pause on finishing the survey now. I will send out any remaining surveys after today's workshop. The automation isn't always the most reliable, so I will be just clicking manual send on those later. So don't worry about multitasking right now. But so yeah, so on inertia, directional and static inertia do manifest differently depending on where you are in your career journey. So I'm going to sort of talk about where you are in your career journey. I'm going to make some associations with generational norms. Gen Zs, youngest millennials, you're likely in early career stage. Directional inertia might look like job hopping, finding, best compensation options, chasing titles, but not necessarily any clear direction on where you want to be in 10, 15, 20 years. This might look like a pinball bouncing around with lots of energy, but not a clear target. It could also be that early in your career, you've gotten really good at something and you've mastered your current role, but because your organization or your boss has never clearly articulated a path for you for promotion or for why you should stay at the company, maybe you're feeling static inertia there. For the mid-career folks, one phenomena we see here is sort of the accidental career. So from core millennials like myself and my peers from the '06, '07, '08, '09 classes at U of R, we got into the job market at some point during the '08 recession, and it was really hard to find jobs. So we got the first job and we stuck with it and we kept our heads down. We worked really hard and we got promoted and we earned the salaries. And then 15, 20 years later, we're looking back on that first career and we're like, is this what I want to be doing? Is this what I'm passionate about? Is this where I have a sense of purpose and creating value? Does it align with the life that I want to lead, the family that I'm building, for example? So that is an example of directional inertia in the mid-career. And from the static inertia side at the mid-career, we have gotten to a point of security. We have more demands on finances and supporting others. And we might have ideas on how to reshape our role, but we're paralyzed because we don't want to rock the boat. Remember, if we got into the job market during the recession, we understand the fear of not having a job, and we don't want to cause any ripples that might land us now without a job. And that's a similar sort of state that folks late career, so this is elder millennials and Gen Zs, are feeling. There is this idea of sunk cost, and I've put all of this time and attention into building this career. Why would I give it up now? Why would I change for in my later in my career? And then this concept of golden handcuffs. Folks who've made it to the top of their profession, they have um, top salaries, benefits, they might have a vested interest in their companies, and they don't want to walk away from large sums of money. And so these golden handcuffs keep us restricted. And so inertia is in some ways a combination of psychological, motivational restrictions we feel on ourselves, but they may also be influenced by the conditions of our companies, our workplaces, or even the historical events through which we grew up. Now, some of you let me know on your welcome survey that you identify as job seekers. And for those navigating the job market in general, but specifically right now, inertia comes with its own special flavors. Um, the inertia in this case might look like trying to play it safe. Try to apply for a job. So there's an example, sorry, there's an example of a client of mine who has a marketing background, really wants a new job, wants to sort of break away from it, but keeps only applying for marketing roles because that's what's on her resume. And uh, she's both afraid of no one taking her seriously if she wants to pivot to something else, but also not necessarily doing the things that she could do to expand her experience or resume. Think about the applicable skills that she's developed that would work in another domain. Another version of directional inertia is what's called the hot field chase. I'm sure many of you have sought advice from people out there and they said, oh, AI is hot right now, coding is hot right now, sustainability is hot right now. And so you start pursuing the jobs that are hot, that you've been told that's where the jobs are going to be hiring, but that doesn't necessarily mean they align with your skill set, your values, how you want life to be structured. And sometimes if we just follow that inertia, that advice, it ends up leading us into places that at the end of the day aren't helpful for us. Um, Examples of static inertia in the job seeking process. If you keep trying to perfect the resume or keep trying to perfect the cover letter and you're late getting into jobs with rolling applications, so you're missing the window to be seen first by recruiters, this could be slowing you down and slowing down your progress. One client described this process as research paralysis. They just keep looking for the right job in the right place with the right people, doing the desk research, but not necessarily extending that to have conversations with people who could actually open up opportunities. Um, and so, all of that plus the fear that many of us have of being rejected, that if we put ourselves out there in ways, whether that's through networking or actually applying for jobs, we are so afraid of rejection that fear can be overwhelming and stall some of our process. Look, if you're a job seeker right now and in this market, um, it's a really vulnerable place to be right now. And I just want to honor those of you who are in that position. And, you know, I'm offering opportunities to chat after today's session. So I hope you walk away with some ideas today, and would love to just keep the conversation going with many of you. But this is this is a journey that a lot of people are on right now, and it does present its own set of challenges. Not to mention the added pressure of finances and the perfect storm that creates stress and hesitation to put yourself out there in ways that are uncomfortable. Um, I can see from some of the heads that are on camera right now, some of you are nodding. That tells me that many of you understand this experience or maybe are going through it or have gone through it. So what is the science behind inertia? So there's a couple of different psychological motivational theories that contribute um, to why we experience professional inertia. So first is what's called the status quo bias. Um, so research shows that our brains are naturally wired to prefer what's familiar, even when better options exist. I'm sure those of you who work, uh, everyone who's been working knows, change is hard. Well, it's because our brains are wired to, some default setting of the better the devil you know. And that fear of pushing ourselves and looking for alternatives or taking the risk to be out there can challenge that status quo bias. Related to that would be loss aversion. We feel the pain of a loss almost twice as much as we would feel um, the pleasure of an equivalent gain. So the classic example that my professors used in business school was if you lose $20 mysteriously from your wallet, the pain of losing $20 is twice as worse or twice as intense as if you randomly found $20 on the street. And this means that the fear of what we might lose always overpowers the excitement of what we might gain, which means the incentive to try new things, take risks, break the status quo, it doesn't always feel like it's there because uh, the fear of the loss is always going to outweigh the fear of the gain. Um, and then there's decision avoidance. And so I'm sure there's lots of people on here who have experienced procrastination habits at some point in their lives. But we instinctively postpone decisions that create mental and emotional strain. Our brains experience some of this intense decision making as a form of energy expenditure and fatigue, and we'd rather avoid that. And so understanding some of these invisible forces ends up being very crucial um, because they operate beneath our conscious awareness. And when you're telling yourself, I just need more willpower, or I just should do it, right? Sometimes we shame ourselves into feeling bad that we're not being more productive. Well, you're really, the reason I'm sharing this with you up front is because we're really fighting some powerful psychological currents without really realizing it. And at some point, part of this process is giving yourself a bit of grace and figuring out how to do this in a way that starts to align with your sense of agency and your sense of intention. So I'll briefly go through some of the consequences. So when we experience professional inertia, there are costs and consequences for ourselves and the organizations we work with. And so, for those of you here who are managers and organizational leaders, keep in mind that if your teammates or your employees are experiencing professional inertia, this could be affecting how your organization performs. So, the impacts here range from everything from career dissatisfaction or lack of career satisfaction. I see through my clients erosions of their sense of agency, a loss of internal control. This spills out into our relationships. This depleted energy, because I mentioned that our brains are overwhelmed and fatigued by all this stressful decision making. It then can roll over and have impacts on our relationships. Can pull us away from hobbies that we love. Could stall our personal growth. Not to mention financial constraints. One of my clients did some of the math. He thinks that because he stayed in jobs that were not really right for him, that it may have cost him over $200,000 in missed opportunities in the first part of his career, not just in direct compensation, but also in not being in the right place to further develop skills and be with people who would support his career later on. And so he sees the cost of following that directional inertia as being quantifiable. And when it comes to the organizations, when folks are not their best selves at work, it impacts innovation and creativity at the workplace. Engagement goes down, which also means that folks who are experiencing inertia and just trying to get by may figure out how to stay in an organization, and folks who aren't sure they need to be there or want to be there or how to be there in the way they want to be there end up leaving. And so you get this impact into the talent pipeline. And so the range of consequences of professional inertia are from sort of micro personal to macro organizational. And again, important to understand that, I've worked with so many companies on how to improve employee engagement, but so rarely do they focus on addressing the psychological needs and the emotional needs that employees are suffering through. And that's a key part of how you break this inertia. So I'd love to, now that I've sort of gone through what is inertia, I'd love to hear from all of you back in Menti. What is your version of professional inertia that you're experiencing? And you'll have a choice to share whether it's static, directional, or both. So join back into Menti, and I'll put that up right now. All right, we're about even splits at the moment. So again, for those who may have missed it, directional inertia is following the momentum, but maybe not intentional path. Static inertia is actually encountering specific obstacles or barriers to your professional progress. Okay, we've got some barriers. Pretty even. Like we got a nice mixed bag. Give a couple more people time to show up. Yes, you can experience both. Great question. You can experience both in the same circumstance, or you can experience different versions impacting you at the same time. Great. All right. So we're about even here. So this experience seems to be shared across multiple dimensions. All right. All right. Well, thank you again for those who participated. Okay. So we set up the problem. Everyone's fully aware now. What is professional inertia? And you might be thinking how you experience it. So let's talk about how do we break inertia. So the answer here lies into reconnecting with some fundamental psychological needs. So my work, my coaching work is built around this concept of self-determination. For those of you who were social science, social studies, history majors, you might remember the term self-determination in the context of as US states were being brought into the Union, they were allowed to self-determine if they would be a slave state or a non-slave state. And for me, that was the first time I had heard of this concept. But actually, it turns out that self-determination theory is a philosophy that comes out of the U of R from two of the psych, and I actually think they dualed psych business and maybe BCS, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. And so they came up with this fundamental theory of self-determination theory. And it's a really excellent framework for understanding motivation. So at its core, their theory is that when we have we have three basic psychological needs, which I'll go into more detail next, but we have these basic psychological needs. When they are thwarted, we lose motivation to we lose motivation and therefore suffer the consequences of not dissatisfaction, failure to perform, et cetera, et cetera. But when those psychological needs are satisfied, we achieve the motivation and success that we're looking for. And the way that I have framed this for my clients is, we're in a workplace, and for our own psychological situation, the work context, the global context we're in, our psychological needs are thwarted. That creates our sense of professional inertia. And at that point, we have a fork in the road. We can either post in the inertia state and continue suffering the consequences, or we can do something intentional to take back control, be self-determined, as Deci and Ryan would put it. And I call this intentional exploration, because the goal with intentional exploration is to figure out how can you address and satisfy your own psychological needs. It can't always happen that you can depend on others to solve this problem for you. Once you've addressed your psychological needs, that's when you start hitting this zone of professional agency and having success on your own terms, again, without being dependent on others. Um, Being able to restore your sense of motivation because you've addressed those needs is sort of the key break here that we'll continue talking about. So DC and Ryan, their three psychological needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy is everything to do with having a sense of control and ownership over your actions, when you work, how you work, what you work on. When it's thwarted, you have this feeling of, I'm just doing this because I have to. And when it's satisfied, there is this alignment between actions and values. You find meaning and motivation in the work that you're doing. Competence is about feeling capable and effective, especially when it comes to overcoming challenges. So when those are thwarted, we often feel like um, I'm not making any progress. I feel professionally stuck. And we are when that psychological need is satisfied, we start to have a core belief, really intrinsic belief that we can overcome challenges, any challenges that are put in front of us. Relatedness, this is around, DC and Ryan focus primarily on this importance of connecting with others. I add a secondary meaning that not only do we need to have a connection to others, but we also have to have a connection to meaning, purpose, or some greater value. And so uh, this is about a transition from feeling alone in your struggles to feeling part of something bigger than yourself. Um, as you can imagine, the benefits here are pretty straightforward. When we have satisfied psychological needs, um, we have higher performance, more job satisfaction. Many of you mentioned burnout was an important thing that you're going through right now. So the goal of this is to reduce your burnout and the general sense, peace of mind that you are owning your career in your own terms. So I took DC and Ryan's three-part philosophy and tried to break it down into a framework with 9 behaviors that help satisfy those psychological needs. I wanted to make them more tangible and really set them into a professional context that applies to both to people who are experiencing professional inertia on the job and need some kind of in-job transformation, and for those in career transition. So these behaviors are meant to be concrete ways to break professional inertia. And you can see that I've allocated them into align them to the DC and Ryan traits. So autonomy includes cast a vision for the future, align to purpose, create value. Competence involves everything to do with mindsets, productivity, and developing skills. And relatedness, everything around community mentorship, integrating our work life, expanding our networks. And for those of you who've completed the assessment, all of this is written down in that welcome page, and the slides will be sent out afterwards so that you can peruse this more on your own. So I'll give you a sense of the results that we saw from the survey. So this is like as of this morning's results. So anyone who just took it in the last couple hours, maybe you're not seeing yourself here, but the trends are consistent. Um, you can see that there is this sort of growing gap here in casting a vision for the future, and some weaknesses here around in our competence scale. And just to show that in a bit more of an organized way, um, it seems like for the most part, there's consensus that folks understand how they're creating value for their organizations, what is the impact that they're having, and there seems to be a good amount of alignment for folks there. On the flip side, um, being able to envision for the future seems to be an area for growth for a lot of people. And a client of mine, he and I uncovered a couple of things here. 2 issues come up when we talk about casting a vision for the future. The first is we think that if we set a vision for ourselves, we have to meet it. And that is not always the case. Sometimes we just need to set ourselves a North Star to start forward progress, get more information, and then adjust that vision, revise it, and set a sort of a new target to continue going after. So that's one issue is people think there's a sense of it has to be permanent. The second is that we used to dream big when we were kids, and we have, through lots of life experience, we've stopped dreaming big. And sometimes there's an exercise I've done with my clients where it's like, okay, let's go back to that childhood dream, start there. And now, what from that childhood dream actually might be usable to set new vision for the future as an adult? And so there is some additional psychological needs happening here. Um, so I mentioned earlier that part of the pivot point when you're potentially going down a path of inertia, the alternative path is this concept of intentional exploration. And intentional exploration is about combining agency, which is your ability to act, and intention, which is having a purposeful aim or plan. And this combination enables intentional exploration through three pathways. I call it get over it, get through it, or get out of it. In a get over it situation, you have the opportunity to say, look at your situation and say, you know what? This isn't as bad as I think it is. And if I adjust my mindset and how I want to approach it, I could do this better. Then there's the get through it situation where you understand that there are dimensions of your experience that need to change. And it requires a transformation of your situation and effectively becoming a change agent for yourself and the people around you. And then there's the get out of it context. A good example of this was a client who was serving on a nonprofit board that was sucking up a lot of his time. And honestly, it was taking up time for that he would otherwise like to have used to start a side hustle. He ditched the board assignment, picked up the side hustle, and then a year and a half later launched a business from the side hustle. All of this, so as you saw from the data, regain autonomy and competence were our lowest scoring buckets. And so I'm going to offer sort of 10 tips, five autonomy, five competence, and then I'm going to wrap up and move off to Q&A. So when it comes to regaining control, there are a couple of different ideas, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just sort of some quick hits to help for today. First is clarifying your decision space. What is it that you can or can't control in a way that can help you overcome that status quo bias and that feeling of the fear of breaking into new options? And one way to do this, to make this stick, is to break your decision making down into smaller choices. Because we have this decision fatigue, our brains literally get exhausted having to make all these decisions. Can you break these tasks or your day into smaller bite-sized chunks that are a lot more approachable for you to manage? This then also relates to connecting to values. What are your core values? If you haven't had a value setting exercise, maybe it's time to start with that now. But being able to align to values creates a decision-making framework that makes it easier to make the tough decisions that can avoid some of the brain fatigue. There's also the issue of setting boundaries. I mentioned my client who said no to the board position. What is it that you can say no or not yet to, and not feel like you're missing an opportunity, but actually feel like you're taking control and making those decisions? And then finally, it's all about creating intentional pathways. When you talk about your vision, are you inspired by the path that you're setting for yourself? When you talk to other people about your plans, do they get a sense that you're motivated and excited about it? And if that motivation and excitement and intention isn't clear to others, that might be a sign that it's time to take a step back and really think about what is that intentional plan that you're creating. So when it comes to the competence side and how you're building capabilities for yourself, um, breaking down complexity And this is sort of like, think of this in the job search process. How can you make these steps a bit smaller and easier for yourself? Again, it goes back to countering that decision avoidance and that fatigue that your brain gets from having to make decisions. Identifying transferable skills. You might be trying to pivot into a new industry. You've probably done similar types of work before, just in a different context. Um, a really interesting way to do this might actually be working with an AI chatbot, telling it what you've done, giving it a copy of your resume, telling it what you want to do, and working with the AI to brainstorm ways that you maybe have a skill and just need to sort of frame it differently in a job application or in an interview. Collecting evidence. Very similarly, you have been successful before, but you don't necessarily always remember that you've been successful. So in the job process or on the job, cataloging all the things that you've done and been successful with, um, and cataloging them in a way that you can then maybe use them in a resume, use them in a job interview, but also use them to build up personal self-confidence and realize that you've broken the status quo before. You can do it again. Setting progressive challenges. Sometimes we set really ambitious goals for ourselves and we don't get 100% of the way there. So maybe set a more reasonable target. I'm going to talk to one new person this week and maybe double it in the second month and maybe triple it in the third month and sort of build up to a more ambitious challenge as a way to get through these obstacles faster. And finally, is related to that is focusing on process versus outcome. Look, getting a job specifically is very, very hard, but there are a lot of things that we need to do that help us get to that point. Networking would be an example. So focus on how you're building out your network. Focus on getting more efficient at writing cover letters. And then as you focus on the process, and you realize that you have control over these outputs, that getting towards your outcome becomes a bit more efficient and may feel a bit more tangible. So I've thrown a lot at you. We've gone some psychological theory. We've talked about some data. We've talked about some practical tips. But here's what's at its core. When you're tackling professional inertia, first, it's really important to take a step back and realize and recognize what is this inertia pattern that you are experiencing. From there, thinking about what I call the self-determination behaviors, but you might have your own set of things that need to happen. But reconnecting with those behaviors and figuring out where are you struggling, where are you being successful, and how to balance some of your strengths and areas for growth. And the third is reclaiming your agency and your intention and doing that exploration to ensure that you are satisfying your psychological needs so that you can find your motivation, so that you can then get done all of the things that you want to get done, be it change your job, change your situation in your job, change a new and get a new job. But it it's not it's not about perfect decision making here. It is about being intentional and taking back control of your professional destiny on your own terms. And with that, I'm going to pause and say thank you all so much for giving me time to talk. And now I'd like to use the last 15 minutes of our session for a Q&A. Um, Robin will put all of these links in chat as well, but I'll leave them up here for a minute in case anyone wants to access the QR codes. And Michelle, I turn it back over to you to facilitate the Q&A.
Great, thank you. There's actually a question in here that says, will you be sharing the presentation?
Yes, I will send a copy of a PDF of the presentation after the session.
Great, thank you so much. So I encourage people to send their questions directly to my chat, and we'll be also posting those links right there that you have for the QR codes. A couple came in ahead of time, so I'm just going to read the first one. And the first one is, for someone who identifies with both types of inertia, directional and static, which would you recommend addressing first and why?
Okay. So this is, I will this is a potentially infuriating consulting answer, but it definitely depends. And it depends on a couple of things. One, it depends on what are some of the constraints that you are experiencing and what is the goal that you are working towards. Um, so, quick, for instance, if you are if you're on goal, if you're experiencing golden handcuffs and you're very afraid of leaving a job because you're incredibly well compensated and the risk of losing that compensation um, is challenging, I would, that's sort of an example of static inertia versus directional inertia is you're working in a career that you're maybe not satisfied with. Well, I might address the directional inertia first by saying, look, I want to stay at this company. I've been here forever. I've invested a lot of time and energy here, but I want a slightly different version of my job. And if I can get a slightly different version of this job at my same company, at my same comp level, let me find something that's a bit more aligned to who I am and what I want to do. So you can address the directional inertia by saying, by seeing if there's opportunities to for a lateral move, or maybe you want to live abroad and get a transfer to offices overseas. So work on trying to make that situation sort of the best version of itself. And then once you're comfortable, then decide, okay, if I lost the compensation, but I could keep doing what I want to do, then you address the static inertia side. Um, so there's a one example of an approach on how to sequence it. But often addressing one and then the other in sequence, there'll be one change will inform how the other can change as well.
Thank you very much. The next question is, what are some tips you might have for figuring out your transferable skills or transferable industries if you're looking for a job?
Okay. So this is an exercise that I actually do with my clients, and my coach training leverages what we call hybrid intelligence, which is effectively using AI to supplement a coaching experience. And so we will I use Claude AI in my sessions. We will bring a Claude chat bot into a coaching conversation and give it a prompt. We will tell Claude what the person does. We might upload a copy of their resume. And we will share what it is that they're hoping to do. And we might be broad. We might just use sort of values-based, impact-based language. And Claude will spit out a wide range of industries and functional areas worth considering. And then we'll go through and say, I'm interested in that. I might be interested in that. I'm not interested in that. And so I had a client who was like, I want to be a movie producer. And so he spent a couple of weeks trying to network with people who did production. And then after a couple of conversations, he's like, nope, don't want to do that. There's a whole bunch of things I didn't understand about the industry. Um, but what it can do is it can give you what I say is art of the possible. And then from there, you can build out a plan to start narrowing down that wide range of options to things that feel a bit more aligned. So effectively using AI chat in this case is just getting like an outside perspective. And it's a bit faster than having to have 6 networking conversations and asking other people, hey, I have this skill set. Where else could I be successful with this skill set? Um, an AI chat sort of hastens that process for you.
Thank you very much, Alex. The next question is, how does professional inertia manifest differently for people at different organizational levels? So the examples such as individual contributors versus executives. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because everyone is experiencing it. So for the individual contributor level, this could be feeling of stagnation or dependence on others. You know, I don't know how many of us, when we were early in our career, we were looking at our managers and our bosses and say, like, why aren't you investing in me? Why aren't you giving me professional development? It was sort of always externalized locus of control that someone else should be helping me with this. At the middle manager level, for middle managers, you got to that point because you've proven that you were capable. but now you're kind of stuck in this middle, like you have all these people that you report up to, maybe you have people that report to you, and you are stuck in like, I want to change things, but I don't know how, because I got to this point because I followed all the rules, but now I want to kind of break things. And I don't feel like I have permission to break things if my bosses aren't saying give it to me. So there's this like implementation gap that middle managers experience. At the executive level, so let's say managers of managers, you might have more power and control, but you're often more confined because of like similar to the handcuffs, it's like this golden cage inertia, this perception of freedom, but you're so weighed down by the stakes of the job that you're again afraid of taking risks, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of getting in trouble. And so if in my consulting firm, there was all of this, we talked about the importance of long-term planning, but because our partners needed to get their annual, they had to achieve their annual KPIs to get their, annual bonus, there was a lot of short-term thinking. And that really caused a lot of friction. And people feel constrained by that. So everyone's experiencing it. It's just a different magnitude, or different set of constraints depending on what level you're at.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. The next question that came in said that they noticed most of the prompts in the survey were geared towards millennials. And they're asking, are they the generation currently seeing the most professional inertia?
So I will admit openly that there is a bias there because I'm a millennial and the core of my coaching clientele is millennial. So there is a certain amount of targeting that I have created. But also, yes, as of my last research, millennials and Gen X's were the most represented in the job market. And, as X's are nearing in their sort of 50s and 60s, they're starting to consider retiring. Millennials are going to be taking over on senior leadership roles. So, um, so so it's that millennials are sort of the big sort of group that I am looking at. But also millennials are hitting what I've termed sort of an early midlife crisis. Back in the day when boomers hit midlife crisis, it was buy a fancy car, dye your hair. Uh, Now for millennials, we're having like crisis of conscience. Um, in our early 40s, 30s, and 40s, we're having families and we're having this whole what have I been doing for the last 10 or 15 years moment? And just because that moment is happening and it's happening around me, yes, there's a lot more focus on that right now. And if we can figure it out, I believe early millennials, younger millennials, and Gen Zs will benefit from what we figure out.
So we have about 6 more minutes. We might be able to do a couple more questions, but the next one is how do we know when to leave? Um,
Mm.
Example, no career growth, low pay, bonus, empty promises for years. So do you have some thoughts on that?
This is going to change per person. One of my coaching clients has a endless reservoir of complaints about her boss and got invited by a competitor to apply for a job. Very similar lateral move, but better compensation. And we were talking about it, and she kept saying, "Oh, but I don't know if I would leave." And I kept reminding her of all of the things that she was complaining about and what this new opportunity could look like. But she still had that status quo bias that the devil she knew was better than the devil that she didn't know. And look, there isn't going to be a hard and fast rule for this because our personal tolerance for breaking away from something is going to be really different. But one tangible way to do it is document it. And this, like, people have talked about pro con lists forever, but document everything you're unhappy about and everything you want if you were to go somewhere else, and just see how that list looks um, out of your brain and on paper. And then try to apply your rational brain to it and see if you were advising someone else, if someone else handed you that list and you had to advise someone else on what to do, what advice would you give them? And that might be the start of a breaking point. Um, I think also being able to answer why, not just what are you experiencing, but what are you going to do instead? So the example I gave, my client quit a nonprofit board position to start a side hustle because he ultimately wanted to start his own business. And so he had an intentional path to quit something and move on to something else. So a combination of like make the list of complaints tangible, decide it if you would advise someone else to do something different, and then what do you do next? And having those three parts baked in will help make a decision it's time to exit.
I think that's great advice. Also, just sometimes it becomes sort of glaringly clear that some of it is kind of the narrative we're telling ourselves. So sometimes you can tweak it just slightly so that your mindset changes and you're able to make a little bit of a change, towards some of the complaints that we have. So I think that's great advice that you gave. So we
Yeah.
have time for one more question. I don't know if this is too big a question, but do you feel like people are staying in their jobs right now because there are less jobs out there and there are just so many people that have lost positions, because of layoffs or organizations closing? Or do you think people are rethinking their job transitions because of the competition or because of fear? Is that might be too huge a question for the last 3 minutes. But
All right, let me see if I can do it
okay.
quickly. So the last 5 years have been a real yo-yo. So COVID, people stayed in jobs because everyone was afraid of losing a job while in COVID and no not and the uncertainty of what was going to happen next. As soon as COVID restrictions started opening up, there was so that was the great stay. Then there was the great resignation, where everyone realized that they were being treated so badly by their employer during COVID that they wanted to move on to do something else. And people really did sort of pursue their bliss. And so then you had the great resignation, and people went off and did new things. And then I think for a couple of years, there was a pretty good amount of mobility. And in the last, I would say, 3 to 6 months, all of that is frozen again. And so, yes, I think fear is probably a really good description of what people are feeling. There's so many layoffs in tech. Consulting is having layoffs. Everyone who's affected by the market um, is having a moment. So yes, fear of staying. Now, anyone who is in a position, there is a position of power that you're in to keep looking for a better opportunity. Um, for folks looking for jobs in this market, um, networking is the golden ticket because it's always through networking where people find out about that job that's not yet posted. And so the need to overcome the fear is, I would say, one of the big psychological challenges of looking for a new job in this market.
Right. Well, you did it. We have 1 minute left. I'm going to use it to wrap up this session. Thank you very much, Alex, for this really interesting presentation. I am sure that people will be taking advantage of your very generous offer to meet with people for one-on-one sessions, to review the results of their assessment and more, I am sure. We did provide the link just there. People are saying thank you was very helpful so in the chat. So just want to everybody's saying thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. And we look forward to hopefully more sessions in the future.